Hello and welcome to Unit 3 welcome video. I don't actually have a lot to say on this particular topic. I'm looking at the study guide. Okay, so I only have a few things to say. This unit is labeled Communicating in Families, and it does include a specific model of family communication called the family conversation patterns or styles, pluralistic, laissez-faire, so you'll learn about that 4-quadrant model. But I also, in this unit, put in other things that are kind of things that affect your grown-up communication style, but that also originate with families. So the other two things that I've included in this unit are the relational dialectics and the listening styles, because those are two things that, even though they're not only in your families, they do tend to be formed in your families and translate into your behavior as an adult, but they don't necessarily fit easily in other categories. So this is a bit of a hodgepodge unit. There are also other things in other units that could be fit here. For example, when we get to, I think it's unit 4, about emotions and self-disclosure, your attachment style, which is formed in your childhood, that really probably could just as easily belong in this unit. But since that has so much effect on your emotional health and how you communicate your emotions, I went ahead and left it for Unit 4. So we're only going to cover 3 things in this unit, and that is your family communication patterns, your dialectics, relational dialectics, and your listening style. So the relationship among these things, of course, is all that your family of origin, or the family that had the most influence on you growing up, is going to have a direct relationship with the things that you consider normal when you communicate with other people. So people who grew up in a laissez-faire, hands-off kind of communication pattern are going to have different expectations for how communication should work when you're an adult than someone who maybe grew up in a protective family style. The other thing I'd like to make really clear when we get to those family communication patterns is that there is no right pattern. So the book will tend to treat pluralistic family patterns as the best because they're high conversation, low conformity, everyone gets a say. But in reality, most families don't function that way, because if you let 4-year-olds have a say in where we're going to move and how we're going to run life and what we're going to have for dinner, the family would fall apart. So to some degree, it's like impossible to have a purely pluralistic family. You typically have a hybrid of like pluralistic protective or pluralistic consensual, right? Which is what my family was. And then on the other end, you have this laissez-faire family style, which is very hands-off. Everyone kind of does their own thing. We don't necessarily talk a lot. And the book, the readings tend to treat that as like an undesirable family, right? That there's sort of a lack of emotional connection there. I don't necessarily think that's true. First of all, not every family bonds itself through communicating in the typical sense of the word. So your family may not talk a lot. You may not talk about a lot of things. Everyone might be like off in their own room eating their own dinner. But maybe you do a lot of things together. Maybe you all love to read. Maybe you just are a family of a lot of introverts and you just tend to kind of to keep to yourself a lot. I think if you've ever seen that TV show on Netflix, I think it's called Typical. And so there's the 2 parents, and there's the older daughter who's like a track person, and then there's the younger son who is on the autism spectrum. And the kids act very laissez-faire, right? The kid on the spectrum has his headphones on a lot. He's kind of into his own thing. He'll occasionally connect with the parents, but not always. The sister is off doing her track. She's kind of like, she's an older teenager, so she's off doing her own thing with her people. She doesn't really want her mom in her business. She'll connect a little bit with her dad, but mostly only about jogging. And she and the brother kind of butt heads a lot. They're not really connecting. They're kind of in their own space. There's nothing necessarily wrong with how that family's working. I mean, I don't think that family is any worse or any better than some of these Stepford ideal Leave It to Beaver type families that we see. So even though sometimes the model may treat one family pattern as more desirable than others, I just frankly don't think that that's true. It's all about what your goals are. And if your goal as a family is to raise autonomous, independent children who are able to have their own preferences and make their own decisions, then maybe a laissez-faire family is exactly what you want, right? So it's hard to say. One of the things we're going to talk about in this unit is this concept of dialectics. And dialectics impact your relationship for the rest of your life, not just in your family of origin, but that's kind of where you get the hang of your dialectics. And a dialectic is sort of an impossible trade-off between one thing and another. So these are 2 contradictory or competing ideas that you can't pick between. So the example I give people is in traditional college age students, they go home for Thanksgiving break or they go home for the holidays, right? And they get home and they're like 2 days into break, and maybe what they really want to do is sleep. But maybe their friends who they went to high school with are also all home and they really want to hang out and reconnect. But then also the family is trying to get them to go out and spend time with the family and have some family time. And so there's this need for me to take care of myself, to sleep, to get caught up on sleep, to relax, to rest. There's this need for going out with my friends, my peer group, and then there's also this need to go out with my family and socialize. So not only do you have the two types of socialization, right, the friends and the family that you're competing against, trying to choose, but you've also got like taking care of yourself and having some quiet time. So that dialectic is called the autonomy connectedness dialect. It's the dialectic. So the autonomy is like me doing my own thing, taking care of myself, kind of being by myself. And then the connectedness is being with other people, connecting, letting my family know I'm around, disclosing, right? And certainly all of us kind of fall along that spectrum. When I was much younger, I had a lot more patience for the connectedness end of the dialectic. And it was sort of expected in my family that people would kind of hang out on that end. It still is, as an adult, everyone in my family is very much on that connectedness spectrum. But the older I get, the more I really want the autonomy part of the dialectic, right? But it's not a matter of picking one or the other, right? They're always in tension. And so you might slide up and down the scale. You might find yourself at one end of the scale more often than not, but you're never going to resolve the tension, right? You're always going to be navigating or managing the competing contradictory pull. And it's important for you as a communicator to understand that, because if you go into a situation where your family or, your family of origin or the family you have now, right, is trying to pull you to connect, and you think that they shouldn't be, everyone should just leave you alone and you should just have all the autonomy you want, and you should be able to connect whenever you feel like it, you'll get very resentful and angry that they're forcing you to do this, which sometimes is how I feel when my family really wants me to connect, right, and I'm just not in the mood. But if you remember, it's a dialectic. You can ask yourself, have I sort of been on one end of the spectrum for a while, right? Have I been over here on the autonomy side, and do I maybe want to slide up to the connectedness side? And if I don't, how am I going to establish my boundary? But you can't just expect it to go away, because it's normal and natural for other people to want to connect with you, but you don't necessarily have to connect with them, because again, it's a dialectic. So you don't solve the problem by just connecting all the time, because you do need the autonomy piece. So it's more about managing and deciding where you're going to be on that sliding scale than it is about like resolving the contradiction, right? It's just, you're always going to have to be dealing with it. All right. And then the last part is your listening. I find the listening styles, so there's the action-oriented, time-oriented, et cetera, et cetera. I find the listening styles very handy. One of the things I often forget is that I am an action-oriented listener, so I have a certain preference for how information should be delivered to me. And when other people do not share that preference, I get frustrated. But there are other listening styles. And so you typically develop your listening style in your family of origin, and then you carry that with you as you get older, and it can be frustrating because you may expect certain things when someone gives you a message, and you may deliver a message a certain way and get frustrated when people sort of don't have the same style. So I, for example, get very frustrated when people give me unnecessary details. Like, I want to know why I'm supposed to be doing this, right? What do you want out of this? Or if I get an email and I have to read the whole email to figure out like when this is due or what they need. That's very frustrating to me, but that's because I have an action-oriented listening style. On the other hand, I may send out an email that has a lot of information because I'm a teacher, right? So I want to make sure you have enough context for what you're learning. So even with these videos, for some people, this is just not enough. Like, there's just no reason to have this information. You don't need these introductory videos because you have an action-oriented listening style. So if it's not going to be on the test and you can't immediately apply to your life and it's not going to help you write the paper and it's not required for a grade, right, you're just not going to learn it. For other people, if I don't make the videos, the class is too action-oriented, right? It's all about doing stuff. There's never any time for them to get to know me. There's no face-to-face interaction. There's no framing, right? So they have maybe more of a relationship or people-oriented listening style, or maybe more of a content-oriented listening style, because they want to sort of have more context for what they're learning about. So part of the video, the reason I do these sort of introductory videos, is to try to hit more listening styles instead of just the time or the action-oriented listening styles. So I just throw this in there because we could do a whole unit on listening. It's a very cool topic. It's important to interpersonal communication to be an excellent listener, but it's also a lot of material. We could cover like weeks on listening. So I don't really know how to do a little bit in a short period of time. So I just kind of choose this very small unit and I put it in with the friendship communication. All right, so that's kind of the framework for the concepts that we'll be learning in this unit. So a couple things. A lot of people have trouble with the whole idea that your communication style as an adult forms in your family of origin. Because here's what you think. You think, oh, well, if my family grew up with this kind of a conversation style, that must mean that's how my style is, right? So this is how I grew up. This is how I've always done it. I'm 25 or 35 or 45 years old or whatever, and I'm not going to change now. So that's one attitude people sometimes take. So learning about the family communication style can be frustrating because it feels like you're sort of doomed to always communicate like that. On the flip end are people who are like, my family doesn't have anything to do with this. I make my own decisions. My family does not determine how I communicate. But that, of course, just can't be true because you spend years and years and years with your family. They're very formative. They're often sending you signals subconsciously. You can't just say, oh, well, my family has nothing to do with it. So how do you balance between, well, my family determined how I am, and that's just the deal, and, well, my family doesn't determine who I am, right? They were back then, but I make my own choices now. So a couple things you can look at. First, there's always this nature versus nurture dialectic, right? So it's not, you don't pick one. You don't say, oh, it's all nature, or oh, it's all nurture, because that would be ridiculous. So think of it as another dialectic, right? There's sort of the nature, which is your genetics, how you were raised, your formative years as an adolescent. Those things all kind of program you in a certain way. But you've also grown up. You've been around different kinds of people. Maybe you're exposing yourself to more people as you get older. You're going to college. You're educating yourself. You're learning new models of thought. You're practicing new skill sets. So your nurture is going to kind of kick in. So it's a dialectic, again, and you have to balance one side versus the other. It's a trade-off, right? You're never going to resolve it. You're always going to be managing that tension. And you kind of ultimately have to ask yourself, okay, what's helpful? Is it helpful to think that my consensual family doomed me to a life of just always trying to get along with everyone? If it's helpful because that's what you think works for you, then yeah, you can absolutely say, my family made me this way and this works for me. But if your family of origin, the way that they communicated with each other is not how you want to communicate in your new relationships as an adult, whether it's with a new family or college suite mates or your kids or your workplace, whatever, you can say, well, my family taught me certain habits. Maybe I'll keep one or two that I thought I really liked, but maybe I'll get rid of the other things that aren't serving me now, right? So that nature versus nurture has a lot to do with what do you want now in your present life. The other thing is to think about the 80-20 rule. So if you think about sort of human beings on a bell curve, this question of how much choice do people have? I usually say that the way it works is there are 10% of us who are always going to be one way or another. So for example, take introversion, right? People who get very, very energy scarce when they have to devote their energy to a lot of tasks. They're always multitasking and it really drains them. 10% of people were always just going to be introverts. No matter how much socialization they got, they were just always programmed that way, right? Too much, their family of origin were too influential, their genetics, their biology, it all went too strong in this direction. They're not gonna, no matter how much, they kind of attend to it, they may change it, but they're just never going to be extroverts. But then on the other hand are these 10% who are always going to be extroverts, right? They just were never going to be any different no matter how much they can move more toward being more patient, more mindful, more single-minded, having more energy by themselves. But typically, they're always going to stay in the upper end of that range. But then there's the 80% in the middle, which is all the rest of us. And these are people who may lean to one direction or the other, but with enough education, focus, purposeful thinking, thought management, right, we can slide up and down that scale as we need to. I, for example, at one point in life would have told you that I was a hardcore extrovert. I would have said, there is not an introvert drop of introvert energy in my body. And now I feel very much more in that middle range where sometimes I see the value of acting more introverted, right? Of conserving my energy, of focusing it on specific things. I feel more refreshed when I focus my energy inward. But I still retain some of that being able to multitask and focus and bounce around. But I feel drained sometimes when I do it that way, and sometimes I don't. So again, I'm much more in the middle now. And so I really like this 80-20 rule because, yes, some people probably were never going to change. But the majority of people, through education, especially I think in thought management and journaling and all of the things we work on in this class, can slide along the radar. But again, it depends what you want. So ultimately, maybe your family did have an incredibly big impact on you and they were very strict and they set you up to have very specific behaviors. You can continue to act as if that's your only option, or you can recognize that if it's not serving you right now, you have choices and you can choose other models or other concepts that you'd like to start learning and applying so you can change your communication behaviors to suit your goals. So this brings us to sort of this last question of whose fault is it when you do X, right? So if I'm very inappropriate socially, or I people please and I'm always giving away my time to other people, whose fault is that? Well, I can blame it on my parents because they kind of taught me these skills. They reinforced them in me. They kind of raised me to be that way. And now I'm 36 years old and this is how I act. So that's my parents' fault, right? Or I can say, it's all my fault, right? That now that I'm a grown up, this is all my fault and I'm a bad person because I never fix this. And every time I say something inappropriate, or every time I act out in public, or every time I give away my time, or every time I don't set a boundary, right? That's all my parents' fault. But you'll notice neither one of those help, right? Because if it's all your parents' fault, then you don't have to change. You're just doomed. And if it's all your fault, then you're guilty and you feel bad and you're taking all the responsibility. Neither one of those is a good approach, right? So we want to stop worrying about whose fault it is. And instead think about A, what is useful, and B, whose responsibility is it? So ultimately, you are responsible for the way that you behave and think. And we went over this a lot in Module 2, right, about your intrapersonal communication, that ultimately you are responsible for how you think, you are responsible for your own feelings, you are responsible for how you communicate and the choices that you make. That doesn't mean that you can just flip it on a dime. So I'm not going to wake up and just instantly say, okay, today I'm going to be the most appropriate communicator, and it just happens because I've decided it's going to happen. No, I've developed habits, and those habits are hard to break. And so I probably still bring around some bad habits. But if I want to communicate differently and I want to get different outcomes from the way that I communicate with people, then I do have to acknowledge that it is my responsibility to do those things. It's my choice. I have to be intentional. I have to choose what is going to serve me best today, and I have to learn it and I have to practice it over and over and over until it starts to become more of a habit than the bad habit. I can blame my parents for this. I can blame myself, but none of that helps, right? So instead of thinking about whose fault it is, right, instead of the blame game, think about whose responsibility it is. It's always your responsibility, right? You are the only person in control of how you think, feel, or behave. And then think about what are the choices you can make now, and what are the goals that you want to have? So if your goal is to be just like your parents, cool. You can probably just do what you're still doing because most likely your parent or guardian or whoever is in your family of origin is going to have had the most influence on you. But if there are some things that you didn't like about your family of origin, about the way they communicated, about the way they treated you, about the way that they behaved, you can start to think about how you want to change those things. And of course, you don't have to throw away the baby with the bathwater. So if there were things that worked for you or that you like bringing into your adulthood, or you can understand, oh, that's why they did it this way, I'm going to keep doing it that way, great, keep that stuff. It's all a matter of tactics and strategies, right? There's no right way to be or wrong way to be. It's just, here are the choices that I want to, well, and that's not true. There are definitely wrong ways to be in the like moral big question of the sense of the word. But if you're just saying like, all right, as a communicator, which of the 4 listening styles do I want to have? Or which combination of family communication patterns do I want to emulate? When it comes to those kinds of choices, you're really just choosing among a series of options. None of them are wrong. It's just a matter of what accomplishes your goals. So remember, nothing is your fault, but it is your responsibility. And you do have the choice on how you want to move yourself across those contradictions and dialectics based on the communication goals that you set for yourself. And that is the end of Unit 3. I will see you again in Unit 4.